An effective technique for subtracting mixed numbers with unlike denominators is to generate equivalent fractions in order to find a common denominator. In this video, we will use this technique to subtract mixed numbers with unlike denominators. In each case, the fraction difference will involve regrouping, and the solution is written as a fraction in simplest form. Let's start with an example. A recipe calls for a certain amount of milk and water. Given the measurements shown, how much more milk is needed than water? To find out how much more milk than water there is, find the difference between these two mixed numbers. Now, ordinarily, we would separate the whole number calculation from the fraction calculation. But in this case, notice that the fraction calculation involves subtracting 2/3 from 1/4. Well, 2/3 is greater than 1/4, and we don't want to have a negative fraction result. This is a case where we need to borrow from the whole number amount to increase the value of the fraction amount. First, let's find the common denominator for 1/4 and 2/3. Generate equivalent fractions for each until you find a common denominator. Notice the common denominator of 12. Also, with a common denominator of 12, you can see that 2/3 is greater than 1/4. Going back to the subtraction expression, we can rewrite it with our common denominator. Because 3/12 is less than 8/12, we need to borrow 12/12 from the whole number. Here is the mixed number rewritten. The 2 becomes a 1, and the other one becomes 12/12, and added to the 3/12. The mixed number subtraction changes to this. And with this version, we can separate the whole number subtraction and the fraction subtraction, as shown here. The whole numbers zero out, and we're left with 7/12. Let's look at another example. For a deck, 2 planks are side by side. The first plank is 5 3/4 inches wide, and the second plank is 7 1/3 inches wide. How much wider is the second plank? We want to simplify this mixed number expression. Notice that with the fractional parts, 3/4 is greater than 1/3. So this will involve borrowing from the 7. First, let's find a common denominator. Generate equivalent fractions for 1/3 and 3/4 until you find a common denominator. Notice that 12 is the common denominator. Also notice that in common denominator form, you can more easily see that 3/4 is greater than 1/3. Going back to the subtraction expression, let's replace the fractions with the common denominator, as shown here. Because 4/12 is less than 9/12, borrow 12/12 from 7, as shown here. The 7 becomes 6, and the fraction part is increased by 12 in the numerator. Simplifying, we get a fraction that is greater than 9/12. Now we can separate the whole number parts and the fraction parts and calculate these separately as shown here. The result is 1 and 7/12. Let's look at a final example. The boy is 48 7/8 inches tall. The girl is 60 1/5 inches tall. How much taller is the girl than the boy? For this problem, we need to simplify this mixed number expression. Once again, notice that the fraction calculation will need to borrow from the whole number. The 1/5 term is less than 7/8. We can see this by finding a common denominator. Finding a common denominator for 1/5 and 7/8 means multiplying the two denominators. This is because 5 and 8 don't have any common factors greater than 1. So it's not until the 7th equivalent fraction for 1/5 and the 4th equivalent fraction for 7/8 that we find a common denominator. Going back to the mixed number subtraction expression, let's replace the fractions with the common denominator equivalents. As shown here, because 8/40 is less than 35/40, borrow 40/40 from 60, as shown here. The 60 becomes 59, and the fraction part is increased by 40 in the numerator. Simplifying, we get a fraction that is greater than 35/40. Now we can separate the whole number parts and fraction parts and calculate these separately as shown here. The result is 11 and 8/40, which can be further simplified to 11 and 1/5.